Hazel Barnes introduces existentialism's journey through the philosophical landscape, referencing William James' stages of a theory's acceptance. Existentialism, once dismissed, is now recognized as a significant philosophical movement. Barnes highlights that Sartre's philosophy is more than a reaction to historical events. It is a comprehensive system that demands holistic understanding. She cautions against analyzing Sartre's ideas in isolation, urging readers to see the interconnectedness of his concepts, especially freedom and consciousness. This introduction prepares us to approach Sartre's work as a unified vision of human existence rather than a collection of isolated doctrines. Barnes discusses Sartre's early works, particularly his challenge to Husserl's concept of the transcendental ego. Sartre rejects the Cartesian cogito as the foundation of consciousness, instead positing the prereflective cogito as primary. This means that consciousness is not first an object to itself, but is fundamentally aware of itself and its acts. Sartre's move away from the primacy of the I or ego sets the stage for his later existential analysis, emphasizing that consciousness is intentional and directed toward the world, not locked within itself. This foundational shift is crucial for understanding Sartre's later arguments about freedom and nothingness. Sartre's analysis leads to the conclusion that the ego is not within consciousness, but is an object in the world. Consciousness is always consciousness of something, and the ego arises only when consciousness reflects upon itself. This distinction allows Sartre to argue against solipsism and defend phenomenology from charges of idealism. The ego for Sartre is a synthesis of interiority and transcendence, an ideal unity of states and actions, but not the subject of consciousness itself. This nuanced view of the self underpins Sartre's later explorations of freedom, bad faith, and the structure of human reality. Barnes highlights the roots of Sartre's concept of bad faith in his early philosophy. Consciousness, aware of its own spontaneity and freedom, experiences anguish at the realization that nothing in its past or personality guarantees its future choices. To escape this vertigo of freedom, consciousness may create a false image of itself, the ego, and become absorbed in it. This self-deception is the foundation of bad faith, where individuals oscillate between claiming freedom and seeking refuge in a fixed identity. Sartre's analysis of bad faith reveals the tension at the heart of human existence, the desire for both freedom and security. The psychology of the imagination. Sartre explores the difference between imagination and perception. He argues that imagination involves a double act of annihilation. First, positing the world as a totality from which something is absent, and second, isolating the imagined object as existing apart from the world. This capacity for annihilation is central to Sartre's concept of nothingness. Imagination, for Sartre, is not a vague perception but a constitutive structure of consciousness, demonstrating the essential link between nothingness and freedom. The ability to imagine is inseparable from the ability to negate and transcend the given. Sartre's early work on emotions reveals his view that emotions are not passive states, but ways in which consciousness chooses to relate to the world. When faced with obstacles, consciousness may transform its relationship to the world through emotion, effectively changing the meaning of the situation. This transformation is not a magical alteration of reality, but a shift in perspective that reflects consciousness's freedom and involvement in the world. Emotions, then, are personal relations to the world, transient and fundamentally ineffective in changing the environment, but revealing the active role of consciousness in constituting meaning. His novel Nausea, Sartre illustrates the existential realization of facticity, the inescapable contingent nature of existence. The protagonist Roquentin experiences the absurdity and gratuitousness of being, recognizing that existence has no external justification or purpose. This sense of being de trop, superfluous, is echoed in Being and Nothingness, where Sartre describes being itself as uncreated, without reason and overflowing all attempts at categorization. The experience of nausea reveals the body's connection to being in itself and the limits of human freedom, setting the stage for Sartre's philosophical exploration of contingency and meaning. Sartre's central distinction is between being in itself, en soi, and being for itself, pour soi. Being in itself is unconscious, full, and simply is, while being for itself is conscious, defined by lack, and always in the process of becoming. This duality raises the question of how these radically different modes of being can coexist. Sartre's answer lies in the role of nothingness. Consciousness introduces negation into being, allowing for transcendence and self-questioning. This distinction is foundational for Sartre's existential ontology, shaping his analysis of freedom, bad faith, and the human condition. Sartre investigates the origin and nature of nothingness, arguing that non-being is a condition for any transcendence toward being. Nothingness is not an abstract concept, but is revealed in human experience, especially in anguish. Humans are the beings through whom nothingness enters the world, and this capacity for negation underlies our freedom and our tendency toward bad faith. Sartre's analysis of nothingness challenges both idealist and realist philosophies, insisting that nothingness is not a substance but an active process within consciousness. Bad faith is Sartre's term for self-deception, where individuals deny their own freedom by identifying with fixed roles or identities. This evasion of responsibility is a central theme in Being and Nothingness. Sartre explores the patterns and mechanisms of bad faith, showing how people oscillate between seeing themselves as free agents and as determined objects. The faith of bad faith lies in the comforting illusion that one's identity is given rather than chosen. Sartre's analysis exposes the existential cost of fleeing from freedom and the necessity of authenticity. Sartre examines the structures of being for itself, focusing on presence to self, facticity, value, and possibility. The for itself is always aware of itself as lacking, projecting itself toward future possibilities. Its facticity, its situation in the world, provides the context for action but does not determine it. The for itself is defined by its relation to value and its capacity to choose among possibilities. This analysis reveals the dynamic, projective nature of consciousness, always oriented toward what it is not yet. Sartre delves into the phenomenology and ontology of temporality, distinguishing between the three temporal dimensions: past, present, and future. For the for itself, time is not a series of discrete moments but a unified structure of projection and reflection. The self is constituted through its relation to its past and its anticipation of the future. Sartre's analysis of temporality underscores the fluid, processual nature of human existence, where the present is always informed by memory and expectation. Sartre explores the concept of transcendence, focusing on knowledge as a relation between the for itself and the in itself. Knowledge is not a passive reflection but an active engagement with the world, involving negation and determination. Sartre distinguishes between quality and quantity, potentiality and instrumentality, emphasizing the role of consciousness in constituting meaning. The time of the world is shaped by the for itself's projects and intentions, making knowledge a dynamic, world-involving activity. Sartre addresses the problem of other minds, confronting the reef of solipsism. He discusses the views of Husserl, Hegel, and Heidegger, ultimately arguing that the existence of others is a factual necessity rather than a logical certainty. The encounter with the other is most vividly experienced through the look, which reveals our own objectification and vulnerability. The presence of others is not something we can prove, but something we encounter as an inescapable aspect of human existence. Sartre analyzes the body as both being for itself and being for others. The body is not merely an object in the world, but the means by which we engage with the world and others. As being for others, the body becomes an object of the other's gaze, revealing our own facticity and vulnerability. Sartre introduces the idea of the third ontological dimension of the body, emphasizing its role in mediating our relations with others and the world. Sartre explores the concrete attitudes we adopt toward others: love, language, masochism, indifference, desire, hate, and the concept of being with, mitzvah. These attitudes reveal the complexity and instability of human relationships, where the desire to possess the other's subjectivity is always frustrated. Sartre's analysis shows that our relations with others are marked by conflict, objectification, and the perpetual tension between freedom and dependence. Sartre's existentialism places freedom at the center of human existence. Freedom is the first condition of action, inseparable from the facticity of our situation. Sartre argues that we are always free to choose our response to circumstances, even when faced with external limitations. This radical freedom is both a source of anguish and the foundation of responsibility. Sartre's analysis of freedom challenges deterministic views of human nature and insists on the necessity of self-creation. With freedom comes responsibility. Sartre insists that we are responsible not only for our actions but for the meaning we give to our lives. There is no external authority or essence to justify our choices. We must create our own values. This responsibility is inescapable and absolute, leading to the existential anxiety that accompanies authentic living. Sartre's existential psychoanalysis seeks to uncover the original choice by which individuals define themselves, highlighting the weight of freedom in shaping identity. Sartre distinguishes between doing and having as fundamental modes of relating to being. Doing involves action and the exercise of freedom, while having refers to possession and appropriation. Sartre's existential psychoanalysis examines how individuals define themselves through their actions and possessions, revealing the underlying desire to appropriate being. Quality for Sartre is a revelation of being, manifesting the individual's fundamental project and relation to the world. The conclusion of Being and Nothingness. Sartre reflects on the metaphysical implications of his analysis. The distinction between in itself and for itself reveals the paradoxical nature of consciousness as a nothingness that reveals being. Sartre rejects both idealism and realism, arguing that being is neither created by consciousness nor dependent on it. Consciousness introduces differentiation, meaning, and plurality into being, but remains fundamentally negative and contingent. Sartre's existentialism has profound ethical implications. Without a predetermined human nature or external authority, individuals must create their own values and take full responsibility for their actions. Authenticity becomes the central virtue, defined by the honest acceptance of freedom and the refusal of bad faith. Sartre's ethics is demanding, requiring individuals to confront the anxiety of freedom and the burden of self-creation. Sartre distinguishes ontology, the study of the structures of being, from metaphysics, which seeks to explain origins. Ontology describes the conditions under which there may be a world or human reality, focusing on the how and what rather than the why. Sartre refrains from metaphysical speculation, instead building his existential psychoanalysis on ontological foundations. This methodological clarity is essential for understanding Sartre's approach to philosophy and psychology. Sartre's existential psychoanalysis breaks with Freudian tradition by rejecting the unconscious as a determining force. Instead, Sartre focuses on the original choice of being made by consciousness, which defines the individual's fundamental project. Personality is not a fixed essence but a product of conscious choice and self-creation. Sartre's approach emphasizes the unity and freedom of consciousness, challenging deterministic models of psychology. Sartre's conception of the self is dynamic and processual. The for itself is never united with a fixed self but is always in the process of becoming through its choices and projects. Personality is a unity of action, not a substance or entity. This view allows for the possibility of radical change and self-transcendence, as consciousness can always choose to redefine its fundamental project. Sartre argues that the for itself cannot knowingly choose evil, as it would require willing what one knows to be contrary to one's own good. Instead, bad faith and vice arise from self-deception and the refusal to acknowledge one's freedom. Sartre's analysis challenges traditional moral categories, emphasizing the centrality of choice and the impossibility of escaping responsibility for one's actions. Sartre maintains that all human facts are subjective, as every observation is a human observation. However, individuals can take an objective point of view on their own states just as others can. Self-analysis is possible, but neither the analyst nor the patient can access the pre-reflective consciousness directly. Both must infer the original choice of being through its manifestations in action and experience. For Sartre, the body is not merely an object but the means by which we engage with the world. The body is both body for me and body for others, mediating our experience and our relations with others. Without a body, the for itself could have no relation to the world. The body is the center of reference for perception and action, making spatiality and instrumentality possible. Experience of being seen by the other, the look, reveals our own objectification and vulnerability. Through the look, we become aware of ourselves as objects in the world, subject to the judgments and intentions of others. This encounter is foundational for Sartre's analysis of shame, pride, and the dynamics of interpersonal relations. The look destabilizes our sense of self and exposes the limits of our freedom. Sartre offers an original analysis of sexuality, arguing that it is not merely a biological function but a fundamental way of relating to others. Sexual desire is the impulse to possess the other's subjectivity by incarnating one's own consciousness. This attempt is always frustrated, as physical possession cannot capture the other's inner life. Sexuality thus reveals the instability and conflict at the heart of human relationships. Sartre's existentialism confronts the absurdity of existence and the tension between freedom and meaning. Life is not inherently meaningful. Meaning must be created through action and choice. The recognition of freedom brings anxiety, but also the possibility of authentic existence. Sartre's existential hero accepts the burden of freedom and the responsibility to create value in a world without guarantees. Authenticity for Sartre is the honest acceptance of one's freedom and the refusal to hide behind roles or excuses. Through purifying reflection, individuals can confront the reality of their situation and choose to live authentically. This process is demanding, requiring the courage to face anxiety and the willingness to create one's own values. Authenticity is the existential virtue that opposes bad faith. Sartre's existentialism is explicitly atheistic, rejecting the idea of God as a creator or guarantor of meaning. Sartre critiques traditional arguments for God's existence, insisting that freedom and responsibility are incompatible with divine determinism. Religious concepts such as guilt, salvation, and the sacred are reinterpreted in human terms as expressions of existential anxiety and the desire for meaning. Sartre's philosophy is a call to face reality without recourse to myths or absolutes. Desire for Sartre is not merely a psychological state but a fundamental structure of consciousness. For itself desires to appropriate being, either by possessing objects or by seeking to become one with the in itself. This desire is ultimately irrational and self-contradictory, as one cannot both be the cause of oneself and be caused. Sartre's analysis reveals the complexity of human motivation and the impossibility of achieving absolute fulfillment. Arns notes that Sartre largely ignores the mystical tradition, where nothingness is seen as a path to union with the divine. Instead, Sartre secularizes the concept, making nothingness a fundamental aspect of human consciousness. The mystic seeks to lose the self in the one, while Sartre's for itself is condemned to pursue a self it can never fully possess. This contrast highlights the existential tension between desire, nothingness, and the search for meaning. Sartre's most original idea is that consciousness is a nothingness, a lack that reveals being. This nothingness is not a substance but an active process of negation, allowing for differentiation and meaning. The for itself is dependent on the in itself, deriving its significance from the being it negates. Sartre's analysis challenges traditional metaphysics by making nothingness central to the structure of consciousness. Sartre offers an ontological proof based on the structure of consciousness. Consciousness is always consciousness of something, implying the existence of a being that is not itself. This relation is not one of creation or dependence, but of revelation and negation. The for itself is defined by its relation to the in itself, and its existence is inseparable from the being it reveals. This proof underpins Sartre's existential ontology and his rejection of both idealism and realism. Being in itself is uncreated, self-identical, and without purpose or justification. It is not passive or active, but simply is. Sartre rejects the idea that being is created by God or by consciousness, insisting that being in itself is its own support. This conception challenges traditional metaphysical views and grounds Sartre's existential analysis of contingency and freedom. Negation is central to Sartre's analysis of consciousness. Consciousness introduces nothingness into being, allowing for differentiation, questioning, and transcendence. Negation is not a property of being in itself, but an active process within the for itself. This capacity for negation underlies freedom, responsibility, and the possibility of bad faith. Sartre's focus on negation distinguishes his existentialism from other philosophical traditions. Sartre introduces the concept of the transphenomenality of being, arguing that being is not exhausted by its appearances. The phenomenon refers to a total series of appearances, but being always overflows whatever knowledge we have of it. This transphenomenality grounds the distinction between being in itself and being for itself, and challenges both idealist and realist accounts of reality. Sartre's existentialism presents freedom as both a gift and a burden. The human condition is defined by the necessity of choosing and the impossibility of escaping responsibility. Sartre's analysis reveals the tension between the desire for security and the reality of freedom, challenging us to embrace authenticity and self-creation in a world without guarantees. Sartre distinguishes between psychological guilt, arising from bad faith, and existential guilt, which is inescapable and akin to original sin. The existence of the other introduces alienation and guilt, as we become objects for others and are unable to determine or know ourselves fully. This existential guilt is a fundamental aspect of the human condition, revealing the limits of freedom and the inevitability of conflict. Sartre's existential hero is one who accepts full responsibility for his actions and refuses to hide behind excuses or external authorities. In literature, characters like Orestes in The Flies embody this ideal, committing themselves to action and embracing the tension of freedom and responsibility. Sartre's ethics is not prescriptive but descriptive, outlining the possibilities for authentic existence in a world without predetermined value. Sartre's existentialism balances reason and irrationality. The original choice of being is pre-rational, But Sartre insists that the rational acceptance of freedom and responsibility is the highest form of authenticity. Reason is not a guarantee of meaning, but a human creation that allows for the organization of experience and the pursuit of knowledge. Sartre's philosophy includes the irrational among its data, but holds reason as the standard of judgment. The End, Sartre's Being and Nothingness, is a comprehensive exploration of the human condition, grounded in the tension between being and nothingness, freedom and responsibility, self and other. Sartre challenges us to confront the reality of our situation, to embrace the anxiety of freedom, and to create meaning in a world without guarantees. His existentialism remains a powerful call to authenticity, self-creation, and the relentless pursuit of being.